When I became a Unitarian Universalist in college, I was emerging out of fundamentalist Christianity at the time. And I was most drawn to the 6 sources. They were the thing that just attracted me. And so, as I have shared with you so far, that the 7 principles might be changing in the coming year. We are in a year of study as a Unitarian Universalist Association to change our 7 principles to the 7 values, which are arranged in a circle, a web. Not only are the 7 principles changing, but so are the sources. And they will no longer be arranged as a list of 6 source horses. They will be more of a coherent paragraph. And so personally, I'm sad. I'm sad that this thing that I was so attracted to is changing. But I realize that these new changes are actually an improvement over the old menu style. It's been 40 years of people sort of saying, I like that one and not that one. It's time. It's time for a change. But I remember this attraction of how exciting it was to have more options, more flexibility, more ways of being inspired, not simply limited to the Bible, although that is one of our sources of inspiration, and it's still an important source of my own inspiration. So when I teach history, UU history, and I got the chance to teach a very little bit of it at a Tell Me More class for newcomers not that long ago, and I'm going to be doing a much deeper dive this coming week in UU history, and I hope you'll come. But when I teach that class, I always say that Unitarian Universalism is not a neat family tree. Some religious traditions can sort of look at their tradition like a tree. They can say, we branched off of Catholicism at this moment in history, and maybe branched off of Lutheranism at this moment in history. Unitarian Universalism is not a tree. It's a swamp. It's like a lot of trees with a lot of branches, and some bushes and vines that connect them, and maybe some snakes. There actually are snakes today in the legacy room in our RE class. So this month, October, we are celebrating that swampy history by saying, in the spirit of Halloween, it's alive! You gotta think about, I think it was like Gene, what's his name? Gene Wilder with the goggles, and the wild hair. It's alive. Frankenstein's monster pieced together. That is our Unitarian Universalist heritage. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, stitched together, shocked with lightning. It's alive. We call ourselves a living tradition. And so in preparing for today's service, I thought, I want to understand this history of this term, living tradition. And of course, we are not the only religion that considers itself living. But this phrase is very prominent among Unitarian Universalists. So I found in my history digging that at the Nashville General Assembly, which was in the year 2000, it was noted that they were celebrating the 55th anniversary of the Service of the Living Tradition, which is a service that happens at General Assembly to honor the transitions of ministries and other religious professionals. So if my math is right, that service began in 1945. And then in the early 80s, when our sources, the 6 sources, were being updated, they added the phrase, our living tradition draws from these 6 sources. I couldn't find if that phrase was included in previous versions or not. Between 1988 and 1990, the Living Tradition Fund was created, which is a fund of the UUA to support ministers in times of financial crisis. And finally, our gray hymnal, which you can find in your chairs, it's sometimes covered with a fabric cover, that was published in 1993, and it is entitled Singing the Living Tradition. So this is not a passive phrase. We put it on a lot of things. We are proud of the fact that we are alive, that we're not stuck at one point in history or stuck in time. In fact, as a liberal religion, which is the branch of theology that our tradition comes off of, as a liberal religion, we are defined by our willingness to grow, change, and adapt, rather than to conserve tradition, which is actually one root of the term conservative, which means to conserve or save the traditions, as opposed to change. In fact, when our two denominations, the Unitarians and the Universalists, consolidated at the merger in 1961 and formed the now Unitarian Universalist Association, they were debating lots of names for the newly formed tradition. And one of the names that was actually the forerunner for quite a while was the Liberal Church of America. Can you imagine? I mean, part of me says, like, nobody knows what Unitarian Universalism means. You drive by the Fellowship, a Unitarian Universalist congregation. I don't know what that means. That's very long and sounds weird. Liberal people know what that means, right? Now, it's got some baggage, some political baggage in particular, so maybe that wouldn't be a good thing. But we are not necessarily politically liberal, but we are religiously liberal. And that's who we are. We're willing to change. Now, in that swampy history I was talking about earlier, we have a particular hero that we like to point to. His name was Francis David, and he's one of the martyrs of our faith. So this story comes to us from Transylvania in the 1500s. The king at the time was a young king. His name was John Sigismund, and he was trying to decide which religion he would be as king. So he invited all the preachers to debate in the town square in Koleshvar, and Francis David, the Unitarian preacher, won the debate. And there are paintings of Francis David standing on a rock, you know, with like light streaming down upon him. And apparently he was so convincing that he converted the entire town of Koleshvar to Unitarianism, including the king, although the king was kind of already Unitarian because his mom was Unitarian. It's a long story. But back in the 1500s, if you were king and you decided you were going to be this religion, everybody was that religion. That was just how it went. You get a new king, everybody changes religion. Francis David convinces King John Sigismund not to do that, not to demand that everyone be Unitarian like the king. Instead, they create a law called the Edict of Torda, which it was written in the town of Torda. It's also known to history as the Edict of Toleration, and it's one of the earliest, if not the earliest, examples of religious liberty written in the 1500s. And here is one quote from the Edict of Torda. "Ministers should everywhere preach and proclaim the gospel according to their understanding of it. And if their community is willing to accept this, good. If not, however, no one should be compelled by force if their spirit or conscience is not at peace. No one is permitted to threaten, imprison, or banish anyone because of their teaching, because faith is a gift from God." It's pretty impressive at a time when people were getting burned at the stake. Unfortunately, only a couple years later, King John died in a carriage accident. He had no heirs, so a new king was appointed, and this new king was Catholic, and he tried to sort of cancel the Edict of Toleration, but he couldn't. And so instead he created a loophole in the law and said that at the date of the writing of the edict, the traditions that were protected could remain protected so long as they didn't change anything about their teachings or practices from the date of the writing of the edict. Now, Francis David had originally in his formation been a Catholic priest, and then he became a Lutheran minister. And then he became a Calvinist superintendent. And then he became a Unitarian minister. It was not in Francis David's bones to sit still theologically. Now, whether you followed a similar path here to Francis David, or whether you grew up UU, it is not in our bones to be willing to stop changing. Sadly, though, David was eventually imprisoned in the dungeon at the castle in Deva, Transylvania. The charges were brought against him by his own partner in faith, his fellow Unitarian, Giorgio Biandrata. Giorgio Biandrata was aware that if Francis David kept flouting the law, the Unitarians would no longer be safe. So he had his friend arrested and put in a dungeon where he died. Francis David died in the dungeon, formally charged with the crime of religious innovation. Now, our fellowship's partner church that we partner with still to this day is the partner church in Deva, Romania, the home of that dungeon where the martyr Francis David died. And it is a pilgrimage site for Unitarians around the world, and we here at this fellowship get to be partners with them and support their work in maintaining that pilgrimage site. We are Unitarians and Universalists at our best and our worst. We are religious innovators. We refuse to stand still theologically, socially, or ethically. We are willing to try new things, to change, to grow, to evolve. It is not always easy. We make mistakes. We try things that don't work. We change in ways that some people hate and other people love. When I served the congregation in Annapolis, Maryland, there was an elder gentleman there named Daryl. Daryl grew up on a ranch somewhere in, I want to say like Wyoming or something. He would occasionally wear a cowboy hat. He was probably in his 80s. He sat in the equivalent of that congregation right there every Sunday. And I found a photo of that congregation sanctuary from like the 60s, and all the chairs were like orange, and there was wood paneling on the wall, and there was Daryl sitting in the same chair. He was a lot younger in that photo. And Daryl was my go-to guy for new member ceremonies when I would welcome new members, because he would come and he would speak to the new members about how everything he loved about that church that he had joined umpteen years earlier, and how almost none of it remained. About how those newcomers wouldn't be there if those things had not changed from his time so long ago. And he warned these people, these starry-eyed, bright newcomers, that the things that they loved right now as they were joining would change. And that is okay. That's good. Because that they could fall in love with what became, what was new. They could fall in love with the people that were brought by those changes. That is what is most challenging and most wonderful about our living tradition. We have a heritage as mutts. We have a heritage as heretics. The root of the word heretic means to choose. Now, to choose wrong, right? That's what heretic means. But it actually just means choice, heresy. And at each turn in our swampy history as Unitarian Universalists, we were on the heresy side each time. I got in an argument with other chaplains when I was in CPE. It was an Episcopal and what was the other one? Two Christian denominations. They were arguing over which of them had an earlier break with the church, as you know, which heresy was earlier between the two of them. And I was like, I win. 325. They were like, you don't count. Yes, I do. The year 325. Thank you very much. We are a tradition that has embraced change, and we will continue to do so. We are a mishmash, a swamp, a mutt. We are a Frankenstein's monster. And remember, Frankenstein's monster was sweet, right? Everyone was scared of him, but he wasn't trying to kill everybody. We're trying to piece together meaning and purpose, willing to be inspired by multiple sources, willing to move and evolve and grow. We are willing to say of ourselves and our tradition, say it with me, everybody, it's alive. Very good. Thank you. Amen.